We've spent billions of dollars of taxpayers' money over the last 2 decades, but of course the results, as we know, in literacy, in numeracy, in science, they're all still declining. 20 years now, spending more than ever before.
Welcome to the Centre for Independent Studies. My name's Glenn Fahey. I'm the Director of Education here at the CIS. Warm welcome to those of you who are regulars here and also to those who are joining us for the first time. Here at the CIS, we're a public policy think tank. We've been around for nearly 50 years, and our work in education has spanned more than 30 years. As part of that work, as a policy think tank, I think that some of the areas that I'm most proud of our work in are the ways in which we've been able to challenge some key assumptions in the sector. And that really goes to the kind of work that we really prioritise here at CIS. We've often challenged the idea that the main problem in the education system is to do with the input side of the equation. We're often told the real problem in education is there's not enough money that goes into the system. There's not enough teachers in the system. There's not enough buildings, not enough laptops, not enough things that go into the system. For many decades now, we've focused on the other side of that. And we've said that the real challenge is the outcomes that are coming out of the system. And so that's why we focus on things that really do make a difference in Australian classrooms and across Australian education systems. We focus on a science of learning as underpinning the things that really work in the classroom. Many in the sector have talked for many years about the idea that of teaching as a sociological theory rather than a science embedded in how children learn. And we're very pleased with our long history working in this space and advancing a science of learning through our work and advocacy. We've often for many years challenged the idea of how we assess children in reading. For many years, our work there was talking about this idea of a phonics-based approach to checking children's progress in reading. And we're very pleased to see that governments across Australia now have accepted the logic of phonics as a key way of addressing and identifying kids at risk of struggling with reading. And in modern times, in just the last few years, we've been extending that work into early numeracy. And very pleased to say to you here today that CIS early numeracy screening is occurring in around 200 Australian schools this year. And we hope to work with around 500 schools or more next year. So we're really excited by the work we're doing in that space. Now, for those who follow the education sector, you'll know that the outlook has not been particularly good at a high level. For more than 20 years, the average student achievement has been in decline. By some measures, up to 2 years, students today that leave school are more than 2 years behind Australian students of just 20 years ago. Compared to some of the best countries in the world, we can be up to 3 years behind in progress compared to their peers in countries like Singapore. At the same time, Australian schools have seen some of the highest increases in spending across the Western world. To get to my earlier point, it doesn't seem that it's an inputs problem, it seems to be an outcomes problem. Now, the Albanese government in the last term and in its early days here has prioritised a number of areas, and including reaching the Better and Fairer Schools Agreement at the end of the last term of government. They've also included some thinking around how you might think of the education architecture, the agencies that coordinate federal activity, and that's something that we'll certainly keep an eye on here at CIS. But today we're lucky to be hearing from the alternative side of politics and to hear some early thinking coming from the coalition about the way it's thinking about education policy at a federal level. I'm very pleased to welcome for the first time to the CIS Senator Jonathon Duniam, better known as Jono. Jono is a Liberal senator for Tasmania and was recently appointed as the Shadow Minister for Education. Please welcome Jonathon Duniam.
Thank you very much, Glenn, for having me here today and for all of you for coming along. But I'm also equally grateful for the work that the Centre does, the advice that it can provide through some of the work that it does, but most importantly, the clarity of thought and the common sense that comes from a lot of the work. I mean, you've talked, Glenn, about some of the things that you are actually doing out in the community, those things that make a difference. And so in my previous role as Shadow Environment Minister, but now as Shadow Minister for Education and Early Learning, the work of the Centre for Independent Studies is valuable and something that I know my colleagues and I value very much. I think it's important to note at this point, the election was only a little over 4 months ago. So I didn't want to have anyone's hopes up today that I was going to come along and tell you all exactly how we're going to answer the problems that we've just had read out to us that face the education system. So in case your hopes are dashed, I'm sorry. But more, it was an opportunity to come and give you a bit of an early insight into what we in the opposition are thinking about policy in the education space, and probably more importantly, to extend an invitation to you all to engage with us. As I've said very clearly from the beginning, I am not an educator. I'm not an educational professional. I was a very average student and an even more average university student. I'm a parent of 3 boys going through school now, so I have that end of the situation in terms of experience. But I think there are people in this room who have an interest or some expertise that we in the coalition could benefit from. So I think that was really one of the most important things I wanted to highlight today, was this willingness for us to, as part of our job in opposition, because I fundamentally believe a government is only as good as its opposition, engage with you so that we can get the policy settings right. I think we can all agree, though, that education represents the most fundamental source of opportunity in Australia. That's for individuals, but also for the nation as a whole, as a collective. High quality education builds for individuals, it builds knowledge, it develops character, it provides perspective and confidence, and allows, of course, each individual to reach their potential. It provides foundational life skills, things that we take for granted when we have an education under our belt, the ability to read a lease agreement or to understand what you're signing when you're signing up to a bank loan or an insurance contract. But importantly, of course, also it provides for a foundation for further learning and for careers, your ability to make your own way in the world and pay your own way as well. So the system, as we know, as we've heard, is under strain, and we know that there are declining national results, and we'll talk a bit more about them throughout the course of this afternoon. Teachers tell us, and I think not without good cause, that they're overworked, they're frustrated, they're sick of reform and not well supported. Parents, as you'd appreciate, are very anxious about their children's futures. They want to ensure that their kids have the best start in life and are being given the best education possible. And in a country like Australia, it does baffle you that that isn't what we're providing. Will their children max out their potential? And that's a live question many parents have as a result of their engagement with the education system in this country. And of course, the private sector tell us that of those that come out of our education system, be it at the end of secondary or indeed higher education, that school leavers and university graduates are less job ready than ever before, certainly more than past generations. And of course, we saw the interim report from the Productivity Commission entitled Building a Skilled and Adaptive Workforce, which showed that students were just not equipped with the foundations required to get on and get the best out of them in higher education. For too long, though, our national debate and the national debate to education has been hijacked by the wrong questions, and I think Glenn alluded to this before. And that namely is, how much money should we spend, and on which of the various already failed strategies should we spend it? That is, instead of what works, what do we know to work? The deployment of failed strategies has been guided by the wrong priorities, obviously, and of course it's a cycle that's been repeated time and time again, not necessarily with the same strategy, but ones that are not dissimilar to ones that have already failed. And we've spent billions of dollars of taxpayers' money over the last 2 decades, but of course the results, as we know, in literacy, in numeracy, in science, they're all still declining. 20 years now, spending more than ever before. The decline's visible against both regional and, of course, global peers. And it's our young, of course, those students in our system now who are competing against their peers overseas that are missing out. The workplace is a globally competitive one when it comes to what jobs will be available here in the future. Companies will make decisions about where they base their research firms, their manufacturing bases, administrative centres based on the type of workforce they can attract here, amongst other considerations. And of course, if we're falling behind, then we're not going to attract those places of work. So we are letting our young down. So given there is record amounts of money, $21,000 per student per year, as has been quoted quite a lot in recent times, being spent on students, I think the word inefficient doesn't really sum it up. 1 in 3 Year 9s is below the minimum reading and writing standard under NAPLAN. Our 15-year-olds now perform on average more than a full school year behind their peers in countries like Singapore in mathematics, and of course are behind the average across OECD countries in science. And as we already know and have said, PISA results are falling and have been doing so for 20 years. And that result is only worse in regional communities and amongst disadvantaged cohorts. Now, just on funding, I think it's important, given the political party I'm a part of, to stress that when we talk about funding and failing to get the results we need as a country, this isn't code for looking at ways to cut funding. This is about how we spend the money that's there. This is an investment in the future of our country and each of the individuals that go through our education system. This is not about taking money away, it's about using it better. And I think that's what the next 2.5 years needs to be about. For a long time, there's also been way too little policy attention paid to the underperformance of boys in particular, relative to girls in Australian schooling, and I think that's something we need to change urgently. That is a massive cohort in our education system, and bizarrely, it's a controversial topic to deal with, but it is something that is glaringly obvious in the results that we have before us, the data, and we need to deal with it. By that, I refer to issues such as boys' lower Year 12 completion rates, their lower participation in universities, and their much higher tendency toward bullying and classroom disruption, and a much greater likelihood of being affected by a disability. Amongst many similar indicators, boys are also around as much as twice as likely as girls to fall into the lowest performance bands of NAPLAN in areas such as reading, writing, spelling, grammar, and of course punctuation. Now, these stats, it's important to remember, aren't just stats. They are individuals in our community who are depending on us today to get it right for them. And the fact that these numbers tell the story they do means we are failing our young, the next generation of leaders. We want to tackle these problems and grow our country into an even better place. And we know what the problems are. And I know that there's not much more frustrating than sitting here talking or listening to a politician whinge about what's not working, rather than focusing on what we can do to make the change that we need to get things right. And it is imperative that we do get it right. As I said before, good educational outcomes are in the national interest. They're the foundation stone for a strong future, again, not just for individuals, but for the country as a whole. And to that end, we need to have a constructive approach in federal politics around education. And as I've said a number of times publicly now, I could spend the next 2.5 years saying it's this government's fault, reflecting on the last 3 years about how terribly they've got it wrong. And as a result, here's where we are today. Well, what would happen is we would retreat to our ideological corners and take potshots at one another for 2.5 years and nothing would happen. We would make no progress. We have an opportunity in this period in this parliamentary term, in the next 2.5 years before the next election, and we also have a minister who I have to say I'm quite pleasantly surprised by, that is open to collaboration. And I think it's important to have the two major parties of Australian politics working together to ensure we get the best outcome. And I intend to, over the course of the next 2.5 years, take advantage of that golden opportunity we have now. A shadow minister who wants the right outcomes for our country, for the young people in our education system, that's me, and a minister, Jason Clare, who is open to working with us and has accepted the invitation to work where we can, and we won't agree on everything. Of course not. We have different priorities in some areas than they do, and we have to accept that. But in the national interest, we don't have to be an opposition for opposition's sake. We can actually work together on things and, in the national interest, get some good outcomes. Just on funding, we've already touched on this. Funding is important, but it's not automatically linked to outcomes, as we know. We've just gone through the data there. Spending more than we have ever before, and we have declining outcomes. That is not good. It's not right. The government's Better and Fairer Schools Agreement raises some, of course, critical questions. I probably deviate from what Glenn said here a bit before. I mean, the focus on the right inputs, money is one input, of course. We need to ensure, though, with those inputs that we are getting the right value out of them. So yes, I agree with Glenn on that, but I think there's a problem on the way through, which I'm sure we'll come to in questions and answers. The outcome is defined by what we do with the input on the way through, and I think that's where the real reform can occur. And the question I've been asking is the system into which more and more money is being poured actually working? And the reality is it's not. On parental choice, we need to ensure that we protect the right for parents to choose where they send their school, the type of educational institution that they choose to have for their children. We need to ensure that teaching is of foundational skills, which is backed up and founded in evidence. We need to, as a result of that, ensure that we're delivering improved outcomes, and we need to reject divisive tactics of pitting government schools against independent schools, against Catholic schools, when it comes to the funding debates that we've seen. And there are many in the sector that would like to see that happen. We need to resist that and ensure that the right outcome is reached when it comes to funding and how it's allocated, to ensure that all students, no matter what school they go to, what type of school they go to, get the right supports and indeed then, therefore, the best outcomes. On the curriculum, I think it's fair to say, without sounding glib, that the curriculum has become politicised. It's well and truly overloaded and, of course, very unclear. The fact that our national curriculum is 1,700 pages long, and, of course, that covers the gamut. But I was trying to figure out, would you believe ChatGPT, which is something I've become familiar with in recent times, told me that the national curriculum is almost exactly the same length as War and Peace. But on a more relevant note, one of our most complex pieces of legislation in this country, the Corporations Act, which governs nearly everything the private sector does, is 1,800 pages. And that's litigated within an inch of its life every day in courtrooms across this country. And there are very highly paid people paid to navigate that piece of legislation, both in the form of lawyers and judges. Yet we expect teachers to be able to navigate a 1,700-page curriculum, which is frankly cloudy and unclear for teachers to be able to educate effectively. Parents who look at the curriculum say that core skills for their children aren't being prioritised, the skills that they want for their kids, and teachers, as I said before, say the content is too voluminous and, of course, unfocused. And, of course, experts who know a thing or two about educating say that the curriculum in its current form confuses and can harm students as well. And I also have major issues with the cross-curriculum priorities embedded in our curriculum as well, around sustainability, First Nations education, and of course this concept of where Australia sits in the Asian region. How you can embed some of those issues in a curriculum for maths or science, I find baffling, and there is no clarity around how teachers are to deploy some of these concepts as part of the curriculum. So they're off on their own, trying to come up with content, and indeed the end result is the one we're seeing borne out in the numbers. The curriculum has to be knowledge-rich, it has to be evidence-based, it needs to be apolitical, not loaded with rhetoric and propaganda, which takes away from the core aim of what we're trying to do here. Prioritise the fundamentals around literacy, numeracy, science, history, civics, a very important topic which gets forgotten all of the time, and provide clear progression benchmarks for parents and teachers to be able to assess what's going on with their students. So we as a coalition hope to work constructively with the government on the creation of the new super agency, bringing together ACARA, Aero, ESA and AITSL. Broadly speaking, the idea of a singular unifying focus within these agencies coming into one with less confusion, less duplication and overlap is a good thing. But we want to make sure that the gains that have been made in agencies, particularly Aero, are kept, are protected, and at the end of the day, we aren't just slamming together 4 agencies that and are doing the same work in the same way with the same bureaucrats shuffling paper. We need to make sure we're getting the right outcomes here for students. That is the critically important thing, and we're very clear in wanting to work with the government on ensuring we get this right. On teachers and training, I think that teacher shortages are obviously acute, particularly in regional communities. A high rate of dropouts for people on the way through a Bachelor of Education. We see all too often, I caught up with one of the state education ministers just yesterday around situations they're having in their state education system where people being churned out of a Bachelor of Education after 4 years of education are only seeing out a year in great numbers of being an actual teacher. Having done all of that study, they could not go on because of the ill-preparedness with the education they were receiving for the classroom itself. Many education graduates sadly lack the grounding in evidence-based practice and familiarisation with the classroom. We do need to focus on things like explicit teaching or explicit direct instruction and find a way to aspire for excellence in what we do in the classroom. Reforms need to be evidence-based, focused again on those fundamentals we want to see our students carry on with in life. And we need to provide flexible entry pathways for experienced professionals who may want to make the transition from accounting or real estate or whatever it might be into education. We don't have enough of that at the moment. We need to not reinvent the wheel. We can learn from international best practice and expand on successful domestic models, and there's a number of them we can point to. And I'm sure many of you in this room are familiar with models we should be considering. And one idea, of course, is to consider a National Institute of Teaching to consolidate teacher training quality in this country. However we end up doing it, we need to get it right, and we need to get our skates on and do it quickly. As I said before, I do want to pay credit to Jason Clare, the Minister, who has indicated his willingness, and I think it is imperative that we do this, to approach these things in a bipartisan way. Already we've heard encouragement from him on the progress on phonics and numeracy screening. But I also want to pay tribute to some of my predecessors in the coalition who've obviously done some great work in the education portfolio. People like Chris Pine and Simon Birmingham, Alan Tudge and Dan Tehan, who as ministers undertook a lot of the heavy lifting that have got us to the point we need to be, or where we are today, and setting us up for where we need to be. So I think it's important to recognise that while there are many things that need improving, there are some who've tried, and some green shoots, of course, in amongst all of the grim outlook we've been discussing here. I think there is a shared recognition, though, that, and we agree with the government on this, that funding needs to be tied to outcomes. There is no point churning money out the door when we don't see improvements in what it is we want to be seeing in our education system. We need to ensure that parents are empowered. They are the first educators of our young, and they must have a strong voice in all of this. And as we approach 2027, discussions around the curriculum need to be focused on foundations and effective. So I want to close by saying education, the debate on it, does not need to be driven by politics or partisanship or self-interest. It needs to be about one priority, and that is educating our young to a better standard than ever before. We need to ensure we have conducive teaching and learning environments and fundamentally stronger outcomes for students and better support for teachers and those wanting to teach. Australia's children only get one chance at a school education, and we owe it to them, we owe it to their parents, we owe it to teachers and to communities as well, along with every other Australian, to get this absolutely right. We need to develop an education system that respects choice and supports teachers, trusts parents and promotes and delivers excellent results that Australia's children deserve in a first world country like ours. And that's why I said before I was baffled when you think about our country, what it is in the global context and the results we're talking about here. These are the decisions that we need to make together, all leaders in this debate, and that is our commitment, the opposition's commitment, is to strive for excellent outcomes when it comes to education in this country. We can't do this from the ivory tower in Canberra, in Parliament House. We can't do it without input, and so we want your feedback. We want your advice. We want your input, and I look forward to engaging with you through the afternoon. Thank you, Glenn.
Senator, so about 4 years ago in this space, we hosted then Minister Alan Tudge, and he said to us definitively that the school funding wars were over. Since that time, we've seen, in most states, we've seen clear evidence that that's not the case. Strong campaigns against various governments of both sides. We saw significant increases in funding allocation, especially from the federal government in the new Better and Fairer agreements. So are the funding agreements now over? And how do we get a better result out of the funding that you alluded to earlier?
Sure. The funding wars will probably never be over, because it's a bit like those partisan individuals who would never accept a war was actually over. They'd retreat to the hills and continue to snipe from hidden locations. I mean, there are going to be vested interests that want to perpetuate conflict over these sorts of issues. I think any objective observer could look at funding, the quantum that we push into our education system, and the distribution, and think, broadly speaking, it seems fair and equitable. The real question, and this is where energy should be applied, not how much and who gets what, but how is it being used? And I used the analogy earlier on today. You might have a faulty car, or a car with a less than optimal engine, and you can keep pouring fuel into the tank of that car in the hopes that it'll go further, get there faster, and get you to where you need to be at a better time. But pouring the fuel in isn't going to get that outcome. Fixing the engine so it operates at optimum efficiency is going to change that. So that's where the energies need to be applied, how we spend the money. And to that end, I think it is a focus on teacher training, a curriculum that is easy to use and focuses on the foundations, and deployment of the curriculum in a classroom where you have things like explicit direct instruction, to name a couple of the priorities. It isn't about how much or who or where. I'm sure we're always going to be talking about it because, as I said before, some will never let go. But it isn't a question of money when we're spending more than we ever have before. Yep, 20 years of decline.
So we do finally have targets for student achievement embedded in school agreements, something now that to credit your predecessors as well, that was a conversation that very much was one that the coalition led in the last term and now has found its way through, and something that we commend here. Do you think that the approach that we're taking toward having targets included in school agreements like that, is it too weak to actually do the kind of transformation in outcomes that we've been talking about?
Well, it's a start, isn't it? I think I will be interested to see how, when we're measuring outcomes, that is then applied to funding distribution. Are we seriously going to say to us, is a federal government seriously going to say to a state, oh, you're not quite where you were supposed to be against these agreements, we're going to withhold funding? I think that will not happen. I think that you'll find that things will just go along as they always have. That's a concern I have, and a prediction perhaps. I think noting that if we don't do something now about those things I talked about, teacher training and a curriculum that is fit for purpose and geared toward getting the outcomes we need, then it doesn't matter what we do, we are going to end up with continued declining outcomes. And each state and territory will try and go their own way, but this is where, under federation, under the leadership of a federal minister, through the education ministers meeting, those priorities can be dealt with so we can actually get the outcome. You can write any agreement you like, but unless you actually change the policy settings, then you're going to keep getting the same results.
So thankfully you mentioned a little bit about curriculum. Now curriculum is notionally due to be reviewed again in 2027, which will come around pretty quickly. And given that some states have just started implementing the current version of the curriculum, that timeline may not necessarily stick. You've alluded to, I'll probably describe skepticism about cross-curriculum priorities. Is that something that you'd be prepared to see removed if you had the opportunity?
Well, yes. Our curriculum should be based on getting those fundamental elements of education sorted. Kids being able to read and write and add up and have a basic understanding of history and science. And I had a look at on the Australian curriculum webpage, and again, I'm just looking at it as a lay person. I'm not an expert here, but I read what was there for the 3 cross-curricular priorities, and to me, I could not see how they aid educators in being able to teach. If anything, it further burdened teachers with weaving something else in a very nebulous way, concepts that they're being asked to inject into education, on top of and perhaps clouding the basics they should be focused on. How sustainability concepts weave into maths or English, I don't think is something that will get better results for us. So they're the kinds of things that I think could go by the wayside. Sure, teach sustainability, perhaps in science. Teach about First Nations history in history, not in maths. Teach about Australia's place in the Asian region as part of geography or, again, history or civics or something like that. I just think we've got these concepts that are being woven in a non-structured way which does not help a student or a teacher in this country.
So a more purposeful integration rather than across the board. Just we'll come to questions in just a minute or two, but before we do that, I wanted to have you maybe explain. You flagged there that seeing a greater role for civics, or that civics is not well enough promoted through the curriculum. Any ideas of how you might make civics a stronger priority through the curriculum?
Well, I think the fact that, as I understand it, civics, because of its decline in popularity, teachers can choose to have it as part of what they teach students at certain points in the schooling journey. Few teachers are taking it up. It's something that then basically no resources are thrown to, I think, is an indictment on our country. And we're a democratic country. Everyone should understand the fundamental value of a vote in a democratic system, something we should never take for granted, especially when it's compulsory in this country, and what the power of a vote is. You can change governments, you can change policy directions, engagement with politicians can change what they do. But students that come out of school don't know that. They don't know what our federal parliament is, or that there's a state or territory parliament from their jurisdiction and how it works and what they do. I'll never forget sitting on a plane from Melbourne to Perth once, and there was a 50-year-old man. He brought me a cup of coffee and he saw my business card and he asked me what a senator was. He was 50. I mean, he's now voted in goodness knows what's 6. Maths is not my strong point. Elections to the curriculum. But that is someone who's participated in democracy now for more than 30 years. And there you go, maths teacher in the front row here. I'm glad I didn't guess. But that is... that will never leave me, that there are, and he would be one of many, many people in our community, the great majority, I suspect, who don't understand what democracy is and what it has. So I think any curriculum changes that involve strengthening civics education should only be welcomed. It's not about pushing a view about how to vote, but what the system is, so that kids, when they get to vote, can form their opinions and know how best to make their contribution to society.
Maybe to underline that, a majority of young people approaching voting age are unable to understand how a referendum works, which, of course, in the Australian context, not so long ago, the referendum held in Australia. And maybe one of the other things to note around that is obviously that, as a country, there's a lot that Australians can be really proud of that we should know a lot about. That we're one of a relative minority of countries that was able to achieve the independence that we have completely bloodless through consensus, and that's obviously something that we would love to see young people know and value a little more. Can I go to those amongst us who'd like to ask questions to the Senator?
The Menzies Institute several years ago had a very interesting professor, Peter Murphy, and he said to me, no society on earth needs more than 15% of its citizens to have a tertiary degree. We are at around, I think, 40%. So that surplus of 25%, I've got my maths right this time, that surplus of 25% are often ending up in hopeless jobs that have no relevance to their degree or are poorly paid. They then generate Labor and Green voters, and they are employing Labor and Green voting academics. Why does the Liberal Party not pay attention to Professor Peter Murphy, who's sort of semi-retired now, adjunct professor at La Trobe University?
Maybe just to underpin that, so the government has put a lot of stock in the first term to the Universities Accord, which over a number of decades does seek to purposely and meaningfully increase the proportion of students with a university degree, probably approaching 60% from memory over the next few decades. To the question, do we have too many degree holders?
Well, I think the short answer is yes. But when you consider that we might have too many degree holders, we certainly don't have enough with the qualifications we need. So we don't have enough teachers, we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough doctors, especially in regional communities, and we then have to bring people in from overseas to fill the holes that people here don't want to or can't because they don't exist to fill themselves. So I have no opposition to universities. I tend to agree that they are a hotbed for a certain way of thinking, as you so eloquently outlined. But if we got universities, and I think what's been happening over the last little while has reminded universities of what their purpose in life is. We have to keep them clear in their mind, keep it clear in their minds as to what the purpose is, and they are supposed to be a part of building a stronger future for our country. Not there for any other purpose. That is to create graduates who help grow our economy and our country in the jobs we need them to fill. Not, and we, Job Ready Graduates program, a policy we brought in when we were last in government, hasn't, like, you could see what the intent was. Let's get people off arts degrees and law degrees and all these other things and get them into the ones we need them into. It didn't work. It hasn't delivered the outcomes we wanted, and I think there'll be changes there. I'm sure there will be. But I think if we engage properly with universities about actually doing what it is we need them to do and churning out better and brighter minds for the jobs that we need in this country, then that is a step in the right direction. Limiting people because we're going to cap the number of university places, I think sort of doesn't sit well with me. If someone wants to go to university, then they should. Like, I'm all about choice. But let's make it work. Let's get them into degrees that, if that's what they want to do, they should. I think there is a cultural problem here too, though. My middle son does not want to go to university. And his mum, my wife, is aghast at the idea that my middle son wouldn't go to university. And my wife came from a communist country where, choice was not a thing, and that's a concept that she holds dear. But because the societal norm in Australia is that people go through school, go to university, get a degree, and then go off and work, that's something we have to tackle.
I've got Janet there.
Oh, yes. I'm pleased to hear that you want to get rid of those cross-curricular subjects. My question is about the departments of education. What's wrong with them? What are they teaching? Are they teaching people who know the subject matter and love it? A physicist who has a degree in physics and is passionate about the subject and wants to teach it? Or, I mean, how much time are they spending on ideology? How much time on how to teach, pedagogy? What's wrong? Because when I ask my many grandchildren who are the good teachers, they seem to be people who've been taught to teach somewhere else. You know, there's someone from South Africa or somewhere else. Are our departments of education really poor?
So sadly, it is the case. I had a conversation with a secretary for a Department of Education a month or 2 months ago, who is an education bureaucrat, manages the schools in her state, and said that the teachers coming into her system were woefully inadequate. Now, I think that the causes of that, and this comes back to some of those fundamental things we need to shift. Teacher training. It's been put to me that on average 4 years for a Bachelor of Education could be cut in half. So the content for the course could be slashed. So they're not sitting in lecture halls or tutorials or doing it online, whatever they do these days, for 4 years with placements. So going out to be placed in a school for, small periods of time wedged in between your course content attendance. You could do 2 years of theory and then 2 years of practice, paid placements. And so then in 2 years, you really only have time to focus on the foundations, the core things we've been talking about, how to teach kids to read, write, add up, basics of history and science, civics. And then they go out and figure out how to teach under the tutelage of others who've been doing it for a period of time. The fact that in Tasmania, teachers are leaving after a year, having done 4 years of education, is very concerning. Where are we getting the teachers from? And I might just add as well to sort of, I guess, agree with you that what we're doing in terms of churning out teachers is not good. The Masters of Teaching at the University of Tasmania has just been classified as by the Teacher Registration Board in Tasmania as not suitable for applicants for jobs in the Tasmanian education system. Now, one of my staff members who has just undertaken that course, maybe a year ago now, I think I'm looking at my team down the back about that long ago, would come into the office because she was studying part-time, working part-time, and tell me what she was studying. And I used to think to myself, this is before I was Shadow Environment Minister, so it was someone else's problem. But I think to myself, how on earth is what she's being educated on in any way helpful to those she will be teaching? And it wouldn't be. And so the Teacher Registration Board, a function of the State Education Department, said, no, this is not good enough. So I think people are wising up, but it is going to take leadership from the minister and each state and territory minister when it comes to the reforms that are necessary. We can't just let things drift. That's how we got to where we are today.
Just before we get to the next question, maybe just on that, you mentioned the idea that there was perhaps having a new entrant into that market could play a role. So a National Institute of Teaching is what you referred to. Could you have another provider come in there if there are so many universities that are not meeting the standards?
Well, I think that this is where market forces are a beautiful thing, aren't they? I mean, if you've signed up and paid for a Masters of Teaching and it doesn't get you the job you wanted, then not many people are going to be signing up for that one anymore. I don't think this is to supplant universities. I think that the idea of a national teachers institute or institution that focuses on this is an idea that would bring us back to what the core elements of being an educator is all about. I think in the question we had before, there was an allusion to the ways things were done in the past, where someone might go and do a maths degree and then go and do a diploma of teaching at the end of it. They were an expert in maths and they could go and teach maths. They didn't go to university to learn how to teach. They went to university to figure out how to be good mathematicians and then figured out through their education how to teach that. That's how it should be. And so whatever form it takes on, whether it is a national institute or whether it is the Commonwealth and state and territory government saying, righto, educators, shape up or ship out, we have to find ways to actually deploy into our schools educators who can educate meaningfully around the subjects they're being asked to educate on.
Very good. At the back, and then we'll come to Andrew. Go ahead.
Thanks, Senator and Glenn. My name's Paul Morrissey, President of Campion College. And that's what you're saying there is a bit of music to my ears, because we're currently considering offering a Master of Teaching, seriously considering it. We've always held back because it's been so prescriptive, these courses, to get accredited. And to be blunt, as you've pointed out, they're not very good. And even the standards you need to get, let's say, a Master of Teaching accredited are not good. There's a lot of stuff in there that's just not relevant to teaching. So a couple of questions. One is, I'm slightly suspicious, say, of a National Institute of Teaching, because, it'll just become another university, with full of these other academics from other universities. So whether or not it's encouraging smaller, independent providers to do something a bit different, because they can't at the moment. They have to be it's very prescribed. And secondly, what about, as you've just alluded to, bringing back a diploma of education, which to me is insane that someone who's, say, in their 30s or 40s, has a good job, but thinks, I'd love to teach. He's got to go and do a Master of Teaching for 2 years, accumulate a massive amount of debt. He's an expert in a particular area, should really just be going in to teach and doing part-time a diploma somewhere. So there's a couple of points.
Sure. Well, look, and I'm not wedded to I'm less excited at the idea of establishing new entities than making the ones that we have work. It's an idea that's been proposed, and it's one I think we should consider, especially if it does make institutions who aren't making the grade work harder to get the outcomes we need. And to that end, if it is about being less prescriptive, but as you know, we in Canberra and most other capital cities love to be prescriptive and to dictate how things happen, because apparently that ameliorates all risk and nothing ever goes wrong. Well, we can see that hasn't worked in this case. As one of the inputs into the education system, the quality of teachers are not where they should be. So should we consider a dip ed? Yeah, definitely. It's worked in the past, and it might be that, as you say, that pathway for those who want to consider a change from having been an accountant or whatever profession it may have been, to go and help out the national effort when it comes to educating our young.
And I might suggest maybe an innovation fund for smaller providers wanting to create potential new qualifications, but maybe another time. Andrew?
I want to ask about discipline, because I bet my last dollar that if you went to a school in Singapore, the children are actually extremely well disciplined. They don't throw chewing gum on the street, amongst other things, and they listen to what's going on and they can understand. My wife taught, and when we left to go to America to have a postgraduate degree, the 3 kids who she disciplined the most in class were the ones who then wrote to her for the next 4 or 5 years, thanking, telling her how they were doing it. And I think kids themselves actually want discipline. I think Australia, you're reading in the paper at the moment about what's going on in Alice Springs with teachers being, pulling people's ears and all sorts of stuff. The problem of discipline in Australia seems to be out of control, and I don't know how you actually get to sort that out.
Yeah, it is a massive problem. I mean, it is the root of many of the problems we have, youth crime and the like. There are no boundaries and there are no consequences, and that is a problem until it becomes particularly acute when they're actually doing the things that we read about in the... No, that's right. Well, there's 2 parts to this. I agree. Teachers can't discipline, but frankly, parents aren't disciplining. And can I make the point that we expect educational institutions, government and things outside the household to do all the work? They can't. Parents need to step up. Where's a society of let our young down by now having this attitude that discipline's a bad thing, just as one example? That has made its way into the classroom, where it is such a fraught environment where teachers are hyper sensitive to any complaint from a parent because my kid felt upset today because the teacher chastised him or her. And, woe betide the teacher that applies a physical element to that punishment. You just can't do it anymore because you're not allowed. So what is the answer? I don't know. But there need to be consequences for those children who do not want to abide by the rules, because later in life, if in school, to your point around your wife and the experience of the handful of students that actually did benefit from her discipline, those kids who don't know boundaries and therefore don't fear consequence are the ones who will be clogging up our court system, living off the benefits paid for by the rest of society and making no contribution back to our country. And so it does have a massive impact. So I agree. I don't know today what I, as Shadow Education Minister, or if I ever get the opportunity to be Education Minister, could do, but it is an issue that needs addressing. I agree with you. Although I will underscore, it starts in the home.
Yes, and to that, thank you, Senator. To that thing of it starting in the home, someone half-jokingly suggested to me recently that the best thing you can do when the problem appears to be that the parents are not disciplining the child, send the kid home, because the parents are going to hate that. So that might force the parents to do some discipline. This, I might say, comes from a guy who's got a PhD in psychology and it went back into primary teaching in the Catholic system. So he's a smart guy. And, I thought that was a good comment. But now, this is where I might be weak on my own civics, but I believe universities are funded by the federal government, not states. So surely the way I'm telling you what to do here. I should put it as a question. But where you could have the most influence, the most influence is with the university education of teachers. Sure, you could sort of say you've got to, if you do get into as the minister, you've got to change the way you're teaching the students. You've got to teaching the university students. Because it appears they're not taught how to teach when they're kind of left in the dark. They don't really know what to do when they get out. So you have a great opportunity when you get into government of actually starting right there and then changing the way the universities teach education. And then if they don't, you don't give them any money. They can go and jump. I mean, it's a pretty hard solution, but there it is right in front of you. So you haven't got to work with the states or do anything, or with departments. You can just change the university's education departments. So I'm telling you what to do.
No,
I'm sorry.
I welcome that. And look, you bring a perspective that I think is important. And yes, the Commonwealth does fund universities. And I think that is a very important touch point, or powerful touch point, where we can say this is what we expect in return for this investment on behalf of the taxpayers of Australia. Because it's not government money, it's on behalf of the people of Australia, for the people of Australia, for our future. So I think, yes, building into education civics at the university point is right, is good, because and I will just say, I write to every one of the schools in my patch and I say, I'm a senator, I'm willing to come to your school and speak to any class about what I do and what the parliament does, etc. It's amazing the number of teachers, when you actually do front up, have no idea.
Had another question over here. Yep.
Just at the coalface, a lot of the teachers are saying that neurodiversity has actually hijacked the classroom, so that they are going into classrooms that every child has virtually got a specific category of neurodiversity. So if they go in to teach maths, they can't just teach to the curriculum, because every child has got has got a reason not to do what they're teaching. So is this, before we even start, good luck to Jason Clare with all his changes, but a lot of that can't be implemented if the basic classroom is made up of these problems.
Yeah, and again, as we have an evolving system and an evolving population, I don't know what the answer is to deal with neurodivergent students, especially when they're increasing in number. I mean, we could sit here all day and debate how we come to a situation where that is the case. and how students are diagnosed and then therefore how they're treated. But the end result is we are going to have to find a way. We can't use it as an excuse not to educate. We have rapidly advancing technology when it comes to AI. And if there isn't something in the use of AI in the education system that can't help with neurodivergent students, as one example, then I will find a hat and eat it. I mean, we've got to find ways to deal with this. If it is a phenomenon that is on the rise, as you've alluded to, and as the numbers bear out, then it is our job to find a way to deal with it. I don't think we can throw our hands up in the air and say, well, it's going to be too hard because the classroom is now a very difficult place to navigate, because if we do that, then we're letting everyone down.
It may be that the standard for neurodivergent students is far too low, so there's too many of them, you know.
And that could be. I don't know, to be honest. And it's one of those things, if I venture an opinion here as a politician saying that the standard's too low, I can guarantee you that I will be in hot water for suggesting that there could be science behind this. I don't know. But there is something not right if... And again, my wife's experience of growing up in Albania, where you could bet your bottom dollar there wasn't anyone who was classified as neurodivergent. No one had depression. No one had anxiety. Kids were told to get on and learn, and there was no mollycoddling or anything. There was you were get out, learn, fight, try and survive, good luck. Did it always work? No, of course not. And we're not like that as a country, but I think we do need to find ways to restore some balance in what we're doing here and allow teachers to teach in these situations and perhaps approach things differently in terms of thresholds and the like.
The back here, yep.
Thank you very much, Senator. My name is Lynn Connolly. I'm the President of the Australian Childcare Alliance New South Wales, and we represent privately owned small to medium-sized early childhood education and care services. So I'd like to thank you for your recent comments in the House about how our wonderful 99% of our educators are wonderful people. We've just got this terrible media thing happening at the moment, but it's a very small number of people. That said, yesterday the independent review of the New South Wales Department of Education as the regulatory authority confirmed at a parliamentary hearing the severe workload burden on all of our educators, confirming that we have to be familiar with over 1,000 pages of law regulations and more just to do our job. And despite 92.4% of New South Wales services being rated at meeting or exceeding the national standards, there is currently a loss of confidence, not just with parents and families, but also with educators, teachers in the services. Thus, my question is, how will a future federal coalition government fix the disconnection between the overwhelming majority of services that are meeting, if not exceeding, the national quality standards that governments mandate that we must, yet still have a very small number of child safety abuses that cripple all of our confidences and ridiculous regulatory workloads that ultimately drive our educators away?
Well, thank you. And look, I will disclose that my wife and her family operate small childcare centres in Tasmania, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Has that coloured my thinking? No, but it has given me a perspective that perhaps others don't have. And I will just say this witch hunt on private commercial providers, I think, is also not a good pursuit. I think that is something we have to be vigilant for. But regulation is mad. The paperwork that every educator has to fill out at the end of every day on top of reports for parents, they spend more time not educating or caring, whatever term you want to give it, filling out paperwork to comply with the state and Commonwealth obligations in order to be able to receive the funding. And so while we do have to have a high standard of care, I think it can be done in a common sense way. And I would have thought that if educators were spending less time filling out paperwork and watching the kids in their care formally, then we probably would have prevented some of the things happen in centres that we've seen reported on in recent days. I mean, if we spent more time with eyes on kids than in front of computers trying to make sure that the report for Johnny was done and that the parents of Sarah know what's going on. And I mean, that is the feedback I'm getting from not just in Tasmania but across the country, operators of centres, and common sense has gone out the window. Again, government agencies like to ameliorate risk. So when we're handing money out, we like to ensure that there is no risk attached to it, that nothing could possibly go wrong, and so hence why regulation is invented and enforced. But I think in this case it is too much, too burdensome, and has gone too far.
Thanks at the front, and then Rachel.
Hi, Senator and Glenn. My name is Courtney Nguyen. I'm also a Liberal member as well. So I brought in a families who have strong liberal values. I don't believe in free education. That's what I'm just want to put to your attention is I just don't believe in that. But come back to your conversation with Glenn, is you talking about training. I love the training ideas, but are you talking about training all levels of student, university, primaries, or TEP? So that's like you're going to have a budget for that. So I just want to know what is your plan and like your budget and like what you're going to do like when you in government.
Well, the point, well, let's wind it back to its most basic element. The point of an education system at any, be it early, primary, secondary or higher education, including vocational education and training, or trainees and apprenticeships, is to actually get people that can make a contribution. That's why we educate people. Along the way, they pick up life skills and are able to live life for themselves and do it well. That's an important part of our free society. I think we talk a lot about universities, but not enough attention has been given to TAFE and other entities that might provide further education. And we do need to address that. There are some good hybrid models where there is an interaction or a relation between universities and vet providers, and I think that's something we need to explore more. But at the end of the day, it is about a lot of TAFE operations across the country don't meet the mark. I mean, the standard of education, along with many of the institutions we've talked about today, has slipped, and that needs to be brought back up to spec. Less people are choosing TAFE because they're not getting the education they want, and I see it in my home state of Tasmania. And so less people are engaging in that system. They're cutting courses, sacking staff, and eventually there won't be that alternative pathway for people to take. And so if they want further education, they either go to a private provider, nothing wrong with that, or to university or interstate, and that's not good for my state of Tasmania. They never come back. So we do have to look at that holistically, because from beginning to end and across the spectrum of providers to make sure we're getting the right outcomes. And on free education, like I don't know that we should be running around promoting free education or expanding the provision of free education. What's notionally free now, and I'm not sure whether you're referring to primary and secondary or the concept of free higher education, but primary? Oh, look, I mean, in Tassie, for example, there's a levy parents pay. I think it would be very difficult in parts of my community to go back from our current model, which is that they pay a levy, a small levy. Certainly doesn't cover the cost of the education, but there would be some families that couldn't pay any more than their levy, frankly, like in towns like Queenstown or Zeehan on the west coast of Tasmania. So that's part of our system. What we should be focusing on is making that system work so that the kids that come out of those schools can actually read and write, which sadly is 50-50 at this point.
Thanks so much. And just our last two, so Rachel and then a final question from Simon. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Rachel Merton. I'm from the New South Wales Parliament. I'm Deputy Chair of the Education Portfolio Committee, so I'm back of the room with very interested in your contribution. If I could just touch on just the issue that was raised earlier, just about, I guess, the importance of Australian universities meeting local students and local R&D in light of the international student numbers. Some universities, have got over 50% enrolment, just in terms of just the importance of Australian universities and students and research here.
Yeah, I think what has happened over recent times, and I thought the debate around international students was kind of unedifying in the lead up to the election. The reality is there are some and were some institutions that filled their boots and went hell for leather, bringing on international enrolments, displacing domestic students, forcing them elsewhere. So they made a lot of money, but Australian students missed out. The cap was supposed to address that. I don't think it has. It's a blunt instrument that has affected disproportionately regional universities. And we have to accept that under the funding model we have for universities that unless taxpayers fork the bill or domestic students pay the full fee, which I think would be a very difficult thing to get up in this climate, universities like Charles Sturt University, for example, University of Tasmania, Charles Darwin University, rely on some element of international student income in order to make ends meet and to continue to provide the courses they do, cross-subsidising some courses within their institution, but also the costs associated with educating domestic students as well. So we do need to, I think it's an issue we need to revisit. We need to ensure we get the model right. That is that we should welcome international students, the appropriate number in the appropriate place that we can cater for. But our institutions are supposed to make this country a better place, and that is to get better and brighter graduates out of Australian universities, which we're not. We keep slipping in the international rankings in many respects, and better R&D. I mean, we should have the private sector knocking at our door saying, well, we'd like to partner with you, University X, on clinical trials or on this new innovation that we want to get off the ground or this startup we think we can get going over here. But we're not having that. And so we do need to have a focus on how we can get those institutions better for Australian students and better for attracting investment in, which would probably then obviate the need for as much reliance on international student income as well.
Hello, Senator. Simon Haynes. We've started a little group called Humanities for Life, a new not-for-profit, and we got 15 school teachers together about 2 weekends ago. And among the questions we asked them were, what seemed to you to be the 3 or 4 key problems facing teachers going forward? And they were very clear. There were 4. They said curriculum, they said teacher training, they said compliance paperwork, huge amount of that, and they said student attention spans. Those were the 4 things they identified. And thinking back over what you've been saying today, that seems to correlate pretty closely with the things that you've been talking about. Would you agree that those are the 4 key problems going forward?
Based on all of the feedback I've had, they are the top issues. The student attention span one is concerning because I think that is a very much something that starts in the home. And I haven't got my phone on me to wave around, but it's those devices that I think are reducing capacity for students to concentrate and to focus on reading a book so that they can do their notes or whatever it might be. But reading, yes, being able to read, absolutely right. So look, it's common sense. Everyone says the same thing. The problems are very clear. The solutions in some form are available for us to deploy around teacher training, around a simplified curriculum, around compliance and paperwork, which probably goes to the discipline question we had before as well, the idea of something happening in a classroom and having the paperwork to fill out amongst other things. But there is a role for society, i.e. families, to play when it comes to helping kids with attention spans. There'll be experts out there that know more about that than me, but yes, I would say if we address those things at the front end and then all of the issues around funding and administration, we should be on the right track.
So you've outlined a few things that you agree with the Minister on and things that you want to back. What's something that you will disagree on, though? One thing you won't back?
Well, let's go to early learning. childcare, for example, I think that the one-size-fits-all approach on childcare is not the right approach. So if you want universal access to childcare for anyone who wants to take it up, whether you're working and you get your 5 days a week, or not working and you get your guaranteed 3 days a week at taxpayers' expense, or majority of, if you live in a small community and there is, there's not the workforce there, you don't have 20 early childhood educators to fill a centre, then, the government's approach, as far as I'm aware at this point in time, is to say, well, the only way you'll be able to get support from the Commonwealth for early childhood education, so you can go back to work, is to enrol your child in a centre. That might mean having to drive for an hour and a half in each direction to find the nearest centre with a space. I think that, and my sense is that the government is very wedded to ensuring that supports can only be provided to anyone who has their kid in a centre, not other arrangements. That's something I disagree with. I think that we need to provide choice to parents where there is no capacity in other ways. I think that we need to ensure that we have a system that is place-based in terms of solutions. So, if someone wants to opt for some type of family arrangement or a private carer, then that's something we should examine as well.
But just a final one to get crystal balling, and if you do have the opportunity to be minister one day, and what's a legacy that you'd like to be able to take away as minister in the future?
Well, I'd like to have surprised Australians into demonstrating to them that we can work cooperatively across party lines to actually get a good outcome, because I think you'll find that we agree on more than we disagree on when it comes to education. Certainly in my conversations with Jason, and we'll put that to the test when it comes time to see if we can progress some of these very basic reforms that we need to put in place to get the outcomes we want. So surprise Australians, but I'd love for us as a country to be able to say that our education system is on a trajectory to getting better outcomes, not in continual decline. That our kids will be able to read and write on par with, at least, if not better than, peers overseas. I detest that we as a country, and I'll just finish on this anecdote. I remember doing an interview about university rankings, and I made some very mildly critical comments about how we should be doing better. And I started getting the hate mail that you get after you hang up the phone from the radio interview from academics here, there and everywhere about how nasty I was. Water off a duck's back. But I thought to myself, what is wrong with aspiring for excellence? What is wrong with wanting Australia to be the best? What parent does not want their student who might have got a B in maths to get an A? I don't know what is wrong with this mindset to want our students, therefore our schools, our universities, to be the best. And so to that end, I want at the end of my time in politics, whenever that might be, and certainly my involvement with the education portfolio, for our mindset as a country to be one where we're aspiring for excellence. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, only benefits can be felt. Otherwise, mediocrity. We'll just see where we pan out over the next 30 years if we continue on the current trajectory. It will not be good.
Please thank Senator Duniam. Now, for decades, CIS has been a fiercely independent voice, working tirelessly to deliver evidence-based public policy, especially in the critical area of education. To be notified of our future videos, make sure you subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. CIS relies solely on the generosity of people like you to help us advance our cause. Check out the links on screen now to see how you can get involved.